Mic check, 1, 2, 3.
Right, good afternoon. If everyone's ready, we will go on the record for the on-the-record presentation for case number EW-2025-0220. It's in the matter of the establishment of a
This meeting is being
collaborative working
transcribed and
case
summarized.
dedicated to reviewing the consolidation of jurisdictions of Evergy Metro Incorporated, doing business as Evergy Missouri Metro, and Evergy Missouri West Incorporated, doing business as Evergy Missouri West. I'm Ron Pridgeon. I'm the regulatory law judge assigned to preside over this on-the-record presentation. It's being held on March 25th, 2006 in the Governor Office Building in Jefferson City, Missouri. The time is approximately 1:15 in the afternoon. Could I get entries of appearance, please, beginning with the companies?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Cole Bailey on behalf of Evergy. We've got Jackie Whipple and Carl Zobris from Denton's, and then for the company, Matt Doherty and Darren Ives.
Counsel, thank you very much. Any entry on behalf of the staff of the commission?
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon. Alexandra Klaus and Travis Pringle on behalf of the staff. Our office address is 200 Madison Street, Jefferson City, 65102.
Right, Ms. Klaus, thank you. Any entry on behalf of the Office of the Public Counsel?
Yes, good afternoon, Your Honor. Lindsay Van Gerpen on behalf of the OPC.
Right, Ms. Van Gerpen, thank you. Does any other counsel wish to enter an appearance? Is there anything from counsel or from the bench before Evergy begins its presentation? All right, hearing nothing, Evergy, whenever you're ready.
Well, good afternoon, and thanks for having us back to talk a little bit about jurisdictional consolidation and the activities that we've been up to since we last got together. So today I'd like to kind of cover three broad areas with you all. First, to give a recap of the workshop discussions we had with stakeholders since the last time we got together, which was May 20th of last year. Secondly, I'd like to provide a summary of our Phase 1 consolidation roadmap recommendations, both for legal entity consolidation as well as rate jurisdiction consolidation. And then finally, talk a little bit about next steps as we start our Phase 2 work around our due diligence activities. So first, just to kind of recap and reorient us, you've seen this slide before, but you'll recall this docket was opened as an outcome from our Evergy Missouri West rate case and the settlement conditions that were part of that. And so we had our first on-the-record presentation last May, and since that time we've had 3 workshops with stakeholders, both on June 6th, a second one on September 8th, and a third one on December 15th. And so we're here today to provide you an update on those discussions and talk about next steps. So to recap our discussions during the first workshop, I'd start by saying that I'd say the vast majority of the information that we presented at that workshop was identical to what we shared with you all at the on-the-record presentation. So it was an opportunity for us to share with the stakeholders about our thoughts on goals and objectives towards evaluation, talk some of the potential benefits that we see for consolidation, as well as talk about some of those potential challenges. Very similar to what we shared with you all. Part of that discussion, we had received some questions in advance from OPC, so we were able to have a discussion around some of those questions on level setting. And then I just say it was, the workshop was really around issue spotting and talking of some of the different scenarios that we might want to evaluate as we get into the due diligence work for consolidation. So we're talking about this is what we have on our list, what's missing. And so it was an opportunity to get some of that feedback from stakeholders. I put a couple of examples of some of the things that we talked about on here. One of the big issues that I think everybody understands is working through the challenges associated with joint generation ownership associated with Evergy Metro. And, if we were to move forward with splitting Metro, what's the right way to split those assets and allocations as we work through that. We also had a good discussion around rate jurisdiction consolidation and obviously mindful that we'll need to be thinking through the potential rate impacts to customers from that work, and that doing that rate impact analysis at appropriate times will be very important and informative to figuring out what the mitigation approaches are going to be that we use. Our second workshop on September 8th was, first of all, I guess we just recapped the first workshop to make sure we level set and everybody was on the same page. But then we really focused on two broad discussions during the second workshop. The first one was to talk about the potential end futures as it relates to consolidation for legal entity consolidation. And that was important to kind of lay that out, because depending on what the potential future legal entity consolidated view looks like, that's going to kind of determine the scope of work that we have before us to do. And so we spent some time laying out those different options, and I'll preview that with you here today as well. And then the second big part of the workshop was to really then for Evergy to present our proposal on the consolidation roadmap in terms of milestones and timelines and the process of how we're thinking about that. Both a high-level integrated roadmap view, which we'll cover today, as well as a much more detailed kind of specific action items list that gets more into the granular detail of the work that we'll be doing under both legal entity consolidation and rate jurisdiction consolidation. And then the balance of the time for workshop 2 was really spent kind of talking through some specific issues that came up, recognizing that intergenerational equity issues need to be considered as we think about retiring plants post any consolidation. We talked about Evergy Missouri West as a division of Metro to be an option in addition to just consolidating Evergy Missouri West into Metro. I'll speak more to that in just a moment. We talked about if we do split Metro, that it will be important to kind of have that clean split, that hard separation for the Metro generation to go down that road. And then there was just a general understanding, to be mindful of affordability issues and the potential impacts from consolidation as we work through mitigation strategies and potential timing on the roadmap. And recognizing that that's not in isolation, but obviously at the same time we'll be potentially doing that work. We'll be in with rate cases for revenue requirement needs as well. And so that we had a discussion around that. And then finally, I'd say that, one of the important discussion points that we wanted to make sure we had was that this is a journey that we go on together if we kind of move forward with evaluating consolidation options, and that it's important that we get buy-in from the stakeholders up front into the process and the kind of decision-making process that we do. Because as we think about the approach we pick, again, that has implications on scope, and this takes a lot of time, effort, and money to kind of pursue, and we want to make sure that folks feel like the juice is worth the squeeze to do this evaluation before we kind of take those steps. For our workshop 3, we met in December, and I'd say that in between workshop 2 and workshop 3, we did sit down with KC staff and have an initial discussion with them. In that meeting, we shared all the material that we had shared with our Missouri stakeholders in our discussions up to that point, and had a good discussion. And I'd say, again, it was seeking that initial feedback from the KCC staff, as well as the feedback that we sought and received in workshop 3 from our Missouri stakeholders, which was to get that affirmation that it does make sense to kind of take the next steps on the roadmap recommendations to pursue the due diligence around legal entity consolidation and rate consolidation, recognizing that by saying that we're not picking an outcome at this point. All we're doing is picking an approach for due diligence and evaluation. And as we go through the roadmap, you'll see, and you got the sense from our initial conversation during the first on the record, there's lots of challenges that need to be addressed and mitigated to continue to move forward. So the roadmap anticipates that, and we really tried to put the work together in bite-sized chunks so that we can stage gate decisions and make decisions along the way. And if it makes sense to move forward at a certain point in time, we can continue on. Or if it doesn't, we have those off ramps to pivot to a different scope for maybe one of those different outcomes that we're talking about, or stop the work altogether. And then I'd also say that we previewed some of the rate alignment activities in the Metro case. I'm not going to get into any of those specific proposals today because that's a pending case before the commission. Just to point out that, you know, we identified some of the current rate structure differences between Evergy Metro and Evergy Missouri Metro and Evergy Missouri West, and we've put already kind of moving forward with some proposals to address that stakeholders are going to have an opportunity to respond to. So just to kind of move into the recommendation phase, again, I alluded to this a moment ago, but these are some of the different approaches that we talked through that could determine the scope of the work that we do in phase 2. And I'm just going to briefly describe each of those to you. The one per state approach is where we would ultimately get to an end state of one Evergy Missouri and one Evergy Kansas operating company, and one rate jurisdiction in Missouri and one rate jurisdiction in Kansas. There's a lot of potential benefits associated with getting to that end state. That's also the approach that has the most challenges because we're touching every jurisdiction and having to address issues in every jurisdiction, and including the splitting of Metro. And so that's something that we recognize as we lay out the scope of the work to be done. The Grow Metro option is where we would consolidate Evergy Missouri West into Evergy Metro. On its face, that looks like a simpler approach because we're not splitting Metro in this scenario, but you're still going to have challenges not only with this, but the other approaches as well related to some debt restructuring issues, the property tax issues that need to be worked through. And even though we're not splitting Metro, it's going to change the allocations, right? Because Kansas customers that are part of Metro would be impacted by Evergy Missouri West coming into Metro. So you're still going to have those discussions and required agreements with Kansas counterparties in that option as well. One of the alternatives under the Grow Metro option we've talked about is potentially looking at bringing in Evergy Missouri West as a division of Metro. In that scenario, you keep the books separate, so you're not immediately dealing with the allocation issues. It gives us more time to kind of work through some of those issues, but it could provide some benefit on the credit metrics for Evergy Missouri West and open up some financing options. And so that's something that is kind of on the table to look at for potential evaluation. Split Metro is just what it says. It's not doing anything else other than splitting Metro, so we get to we create an Evergy Missouri Metro and an Evergy Kansas Metro company. That is, in our opinion, not a viable end state because you're creating two small utilities, and so you're really exacerbating the problem we're trying to address. So split Metro might be an important component in getting to one of the other end states, but by itself, we don't see that as a viable option. Kansas only one would be a scenario where we determine with our Missouri stakeholders that we don't think we want to pursue further work on consolidation for whatever reason. And so in Kansas only one, we would work with the Kansas Commission and our Kansas stakeholders on the option of potentially consolidating Evergy Kansas South into Evergy Kansas Central. The Kansas only two option splits Metro, and then we consolidate Evergy Kansas Metro into Evergy Kansas Central. We also don't see that as a viable option because you have a smaller standalone Evergy Missouri Metro utility now that's out there, and without consolidating that with Evergy Missouri West, we just don't think that benefits Missouri. Then the final two, the path of least resistance A is the Grow Metro option, and then the Kansas only one. Basically, we do everything except split Metro in that scenario, and the path of least resistance B is where we do everything under the one per state approach, except we determine the debt restructuring issues are too high to overcome to absorb Kansas South into Kansas Central. So those are kind of the different potential end states, and again, the due diligence will look different depending on the direction we go. I alluded to this a minute ago, but we did recommend, and I think at this point the stakeholders, although they're here and can speak for themselves, but are on board with kind of moving forward into phase 2 for an evaluation that considers a scope that would look towards a potential one per state approach. And again, with all of the off-ramps that we described. The service company, I wanted to mention that as well. In the event that we move forward with legal entity consolidation and an option that includes the splitting of Metro, we think that that could be a triggering event to stand up a services company at that point. And I'll elaborate on that in just a moment. And then on rate jurisdiction consolidation, our recommendation is to continue to move forward on work around consolidating Evergy Missouri Metro and Evergy Missouri West. Theoretically, we could pursue rate jurisdiction consolidation independent of any of the activities around legal entity consolidation. Our recommendation, though, ties them together because, and I'll elaborate more in a minute, but we think that there's some benefits to getting some decisions on legal entity consolidation prior to making some of the rate jurisdiction consolidation decisions. So just briefly, I mentioned the potential evaluation of a service company. You know, today Evergy uses the embedded approach for shared services with our approved cost allocation manuals and our affiliate agreements. And we don't really anticipate a lot of synergy savings from standing up a services company because we've achieved those from our Westar merger and the actions that we've taken since then. But if we were to split Metro, that would also require us to do a whole bunch of recontracting of agreements and contracts that are out there with Metro and other entities. And so that is something that we thought made sense to consider a skinny version of a services company, as well as we have a lot of employees that are today Evergy Metro employees. So if we split Metro, we're going to have to determine where to put them. And so in the event that that is a path we move forward on that would include splitting Metro, at that time we would evaluate whether a service company might make sense. If we determine to go a different path that doesn't include that, we're probably not going to be pursuing looking at a services company. So in terms of rate jurisdiction consolidation, I think we touched briefly on this in the first on the record, but we kind of are looking at it in three big steps. First is to address the rate structure differences between Evergy Missouri West and Evergy Missouri Metro, and look at trying to get better alignment between those, because that then you're comparing apples to apples on some of the cost drivers when looking across the different rate districts. And then the next big step is when you come in and you make a request to consolidate the revenue requirement for Missouri instead of having it in the two separate utility companies. And then following that is where then we would continue in the subsequent cases to have the mitigation steps in place to reduce the price differences to where we're ultimately, hopefully, able to consolidate into one rate district. Some of the takeaways as we think about the rate consolidation, there's no shortcut to that. Bill impact tolerance is going to largely determine the pace of rate consolidation. Obviously interacting with our stakeholders and getting their feedback on proposals will have a big impact in terms of what that ultimately looks like. I alluded to the fact that the C&I rate area is where we have the biggest differences between Evergy Missouri West and Evergy Metro, so that will be a big focus in the upcoming cases. And there's a couple different ways that you can look at mitigation strategies, and we'd be looking to working with our stakeholders to kind of work through and what that might look like. The only other thing I'd mention here on this slide is we do intend to use a UI planner tool that will help us with a lot of the rate impact, bill impact analysis that's going to need to be done as we kind of get into that stage. And so that should help us be more efficient and look at different scenarios for the different potential mitigation paths and strategies. I'm going to speak to this slide as I show you this slide, but this is a view of kind of the high-level integrated roadmap. You've got the legal entity consolidation work on the top, the service company in the middle, and the rate jurisdiction consolidation work on the bottom. The key date I'd point you to is 2029. I'd start by just saying don't put too much emphasis on the dates themselves. These are dates for planning purposes, and that they will adjust as appropriate with the due diligence work that needs to be done and the stakeholder discussions and the negotiations and the decision points that need to happen. But for planning purposes, this is to help kind of give a sense of how the work interacts with each other. So 2029, with this example, would be us coming in and filing concurrently in Missouri and Kansas a merger case. And so looking backwards from there, between now and then, will be the phase 2 due diligence work that we would be working with stakeholders on in both Missouri and Kansas. During that time, if we determine that we're able to successfully address the various challenges associated with splitting Metro and getting to that one per state approach, then we'd also then be doing the due diligence work around potentially a services company. And if we ended up with that end state for our filing for the merger, then we'd bring in a filing for the services company at that time as well. If we move in a different direction, we probably wouldn't. The rate jurisdiction consolidation work, as I described, the rate alignment work is happening now. It's already kind of underway with our current pending case. And we continue to work through that in the cases up to that decision on legal entity consolidation. And once we get that clarity from the commission, then we would follow that up with a filing to consolidate the revenue requirement in Missouri, and then the subsequent cases associated with the phase-in of the pricing. This just goes a kind of one step layer deeper on legal entity consolidation to give a sense of the kind of the time spent on some of these different activities. We're standing up the deal structure now. Step 1 is the phase where we're really drawing the boundaries, where we're doing all of the work on allocations and working on what's the appropriate way to split up the assets. Step 2.1, determine that post-consolidation operations. That would be where we would be doing our evaluation around a services company. If we pursued that, it'd be where we would be looking at what the staffing of the new legal entities would look like. It include the review of all the multiple legal contracts that we have. Step 2.2 is the determining of the financing. This is where we're doing that due diligence around the debt restructuring needs and working through the potential issues there. That's a step that we probably are moving forward. In reality, I expect that work's going to happen sooner in conjunction with step 1, because as you know, that's where some of the big impactful impacts are that we're going to really need to work through when it comes to the make-whole payments and the refinancing costs that we kind of gave you a snapshot of in the first on the record. Step 2.3, the planning and assessments. That's where we're working through, the filings for the Missouri and the Kansas commissions, the FERC, the NRC filings that would be required. That's also where we'd be working through the property tax issues and working through mitigating those differences that we're seeing on the property tax changes for the counties. And then steps 3 and 4, step 3 would be the formal approval process, and 4 would be the implementation and the required steps associated with that. I'm not going to dwell on this slide. This is just an example of some of those structural differences that exist today between Missouri West and Missouri Metro. It's not exhaustive, but it gives you kind of an example of some of those C&I differences. And again, those are some of those things are pending in our current Metro case. So as we kind of transition from here forward, phase 1 was really what we've been working on the last year, and with putting the roadmap together, having those discussions with the stakeholders, getting buy-in on the process to collectively how to move forward. Phase 2 is really where the due diligence work begins in earnest. Unlike phase one, phase two would require interaction and input from a lot more Evergy employees. So we'll be standing up the appropriate governance structure and multifunctional teams to do the appropriate due diligence activities with the subject matter experts that would be involved in that. And then we'd have communications with our stakeholders at the appropriate decision points as they go through that due diligence. And then we talked about this in workshop 3 with the stakeholders, that we're going to require some outside expertise to do some of this due diligence. And so that would include some potential consultants, the outside law firm, the investment banks, certainly to help with some of that debt restructuring issues and working through the covenants and working with the bondholders. So in terms of kind of how this works, I've really kind of covered this slide already, but the phase 2, the due diligence, is those various steps we already walked through. This is just a kind of a high-level example of how we're looking at approaching the governance for the due diligence work. You can see it will incorporate a lot of different folks that would have the appropriate charters established to determine, how they're going to go about the work and prioritize the work. And then this is just an estimated high-level view of kind of how we're thinking about the work for the rest of this year. Obviously pending feedback and guidance from you all today, but kind of the second line here is kind of shows where we are today with the on the record, and we would be intending to kind of stand up the internal teams, work on the RFP process for the external expertise to bring in, and then just work on the due diligence and the roadmaps that have been drafted as part of phase 1. And along the way, as appropriate, and we get to big decision points, circling back with our Missouri stakeholders and our Kansas stakeholders to work through the issues that they've identified. And with that, I'll pause and appreciate your time and would take any questions.
All right, thank you. Let me see if we have any bench questions. Chair Hahn, no questions. Commissioner Coleman. Anything else from Evergy? We don't have any bench questions. Is there anything from staff, or let me give staff a chance first. Anything from staff?
Nothing specific or of substance. We do want to thank Evergy for their time and their work that they've put into this, and we look forward to having further conversations in the future.
Ms. Klaus, thank you. Anything from public counsel?
We would also just echo that, the thanks to Evergy and to staff for letting us participate, and looking forward to working together in the future.
Right. Ms. Van Gerpen, thank you. Anything further from council or from the bench? Hearing nothing, I believe that wraps it up, and then we will go off the record in the on-the-record presentation in EW-2025-0220. Thank you very much. We're off the record.
Thank you.
Thank you.